Alrighty, folks. It's Baku prediction time. It's the fourth race, and it's the fourth week of waiting from Australia. That was a long break, wasn't it? We'd only just had the winter break, then we had the spring break or something like that. The biggest thing that I've seen in the news is that the DRS on the actual long straight, one of the longest straights on the calendar, if not the longest, has been shortened by 100 meters. Now, you may think that might not actually do much. Well, if you think about it, it's actually something that will not benefit the Red Bulls at all. Their DRS is the most effective throughout the entire grid. The one thing that will throw all the predictions out of the window is the fact that we've had 4 weeks almost to actually have some developments on all the cars. And based on all of the shots of the rear wings, because the rear wing is going to be really important here, like it is at Monza, McLaren's updates have not been there. It turns out that most of their upgrades have been to do with the floor. Practically a whole new floor down there, and if it works, we'll actually have some really good downforce, and that means in all of the twisty windy bits, so everything that's not the straight, McLaren will actually be really, really good. But then again, you have the straight, where you spend nearly half the lap. They're going to just be a barn door. Not the best, but I think some solid points. You know, maybe in 8th place if they're lucky. Do I think that Red Bull's going to actually dominate here? Well, I think based on that DRS thing, they're not going to have as much of an easy time overtaking people. They probably are on course to be favourites to win, or definitely be on the hunt for the win. Checo giving a good fight because he is really good at street circuits. He has won at Baku before, but then again, you have the sprint race, which is something really, really interesting. Red Bull and Christian Horner have been going on the record saying many times they are not fans of the sprint format because, well, what do you expect? It's going to be putting their cars in jeopardy because all of the other drivers, including the Ferrari drivers, the Mercedes drivers, the Aston Martin drivers, particularly Alonso, are going to be gunning for the Red Bulls to try and take away as many points as possible in those sprint races. And what might that lead to? Crashes! And lots of them. This will certainly make Red Bull a little bit nervous. Well, that's going to be good for us. Then, of course, there's the sprint format itself. So you can go see my thoughts about it here in more detail. But in terms of what I can actually really expect, Pierre Gasly at Tauri was really good. I think he got a 6th place. He was certainly up there. So I'm expecting Gasly to put in a good solid position here. Well, speaking of which, it'll be the debut of the mostly blue Alpine car. Williams, do I feel like they'll actually be good? Well, they were going to be at Albert Park, but then Albon put it in the wall, which he himself is actually really regretting. But if they can actually make it work, Williams is one of the best on the straights, and if DRS is less important, then Williams could actually make up for some time during the long straight. Whether or not they're actually okay in the actually wiggly, windy bits, then that's something we need to see. But Williams, they could get maybe a cheeky point. Dark horse I'd like to talk about here, Yuki Sonoda. If AlphaTauri can get their act together and actually get something out of this weekend, especially since their team principal is announcing his retirement at the end of the season to be replaced with Ferrari's Laurent Mekies, who was the race director at Ferrari, then I think that maybe Yuki Sonoda could actually be really good and try and salvage something for AlphaTauri. This season has not been kind to them. I think for sure that AlphaTauri is the slowest team on the grid. Williams, most likely 8th or 9th, but they are actually in the hunt. They have improved a lot. And even in the short time that James Vowles has been the team principal, he's been able to work his magic and actually show that Williams do mean business and they are keen to improve. Mercedes, what do I think about them? Well, no one's really sure because everyone thought that throughout 2022, Mercedes was sandbagging at the early parts of it, but then it turned out that they weren't. They were really in dire straits. Now it seems to be the opposite, in going, oh no, our car's not really, really good. But then, oh, would you look at that? Lewis was not that far off the win and getting 2nd place at Australia. What does this mean for them? Is the W14 actually better than we all thought? Well, could be. And we're starting to get a little bit of rumblings about inter-team rivalry between Russell and Hamilton. I feel like Mercedes are a lot more competitive than they let on. Now, that's of course, we got to talk about the Aston Martin here. It turns out that the upgrades that they have brought to Baku aren't related to the rear wing. It's been mostly kept to a minimum, the development, but again, the DRS on the straight has been reduced a little bit, which will minimize the impact that they have, but they do have a lower load rear wing. It's not as draggy in theory, but it may mean that they sacrifice some speed in the corners and stuff like that. But that car as a whole is a really, really good one. So I feel like Alonso will certainly still be up there. When Alonso has been at Baku, he has actually been really good. I remember 2018 when he was driving for McLaren. He was able to bring that car back on 2 wheels and still get 8th place at the end of it all after a very extensive pit stop. That man around here is very, very tenacious. And now we've got an Alonso who's really, really jazzed and buzzed. Aston Martin have scored more points in 3 races than they did in the entirety of last season. They are fired up. They've definitely got stuff cooking. Maybe, this is a bit of a cheeky theory, perhaps they have actually been working on other stuff because everyone's been thinking, oh, they're going to be working on the rear wing or something like that. Everyone would know what their development would be. They may have been working on other things that they may deem to be weaknesses in their car, the AMR23. So this is just going to throw in some intrigue here. Then we'll start to see throughout the course of the future races Red Bull's development disadvantage and whether they can actually keep up or keep the gap between other teams. This will actually become more apparent, especially in the next 6 weeks. We've got 5 races coming up here, and maybe some teams have not brought stuff for Baku. Maybe they brought it for the other races. We'll have to see. I mean, Monaco will be a little bit of a misnomer there because you really wouldn't bring upgrades to Monaco. It's just sort of a bring your very tight steering rack and pray. So, okay, let's get to the top 5. It's going to be Checo, then Verstappen, then Alonso. Then in terms of who else it's going to be, well, Stroll could be in for a shout in the top 5, but I'm going to do a cheeky punt and say that Pierre Gasly for 4th place. He's really good around here, and with a very decent car in the Alpine on its day, that could be a bit of a surprise. And then I'm going to say Charles. Charles for 5th place, because again, he is very solid. He has done well here before. He has won here in Formula 2. And if he can actually get that car over the finish line, then we might get something good there. But Ferrari, they are certainly underperforming where they should be, and Aston Martin overperforming. Could there be something with Alonso getting 2nd place? Really depends on what happens here. And not to mention what happens in the sprint. I can't really make a prediction for the sprint because everyone's just going to be going for it intensely. That is something I don't think you can predict because the sprint shootout is going to be nuts. Am I looking forward to this new format? I certainly want to see it. I'm just looking at what you see on paper and going, okay, let's see how it goes. And I hope that you see how it goes too. Enjoy.